Hello. When people picture Weimar Berlin, they usually picture it outdoors. They see the city lit up and restless, all movement and appetites, as though the age existed mainly in public. The famous Berlin is a Berlin of street signs and traffic and cafes and dance floors and people hurrying everywhere under electric lights. But most people didn't live their lives in public places. They lived them behind doors. That's where Berlin really was, in rooms, in the places people came back to when the performance stopped or when they had no performance to begin with. In rooms where people slept, washed, worried, and tried to keep warm, tried to negotiate respectability, or simply lay awake, feeling the city outside was moving faster than they could handle. Once you start looking there, the city changes. It stops being a backdrop and starts becoming what it actually was, a stack of different lives pressed hard against each other, often sharing the same building, but not remotely sharing the same world. I really think that matters. Uh, Let me put it another way. I think it tells the truth much more clearly than the postcard picture or the TV version does. Let's have a look at it and let's start at the bottom. There were those who had nowhere to go, who slept in doorways, squatted in old industrial buildings, and occasionally found a place in a hostel. There are people like that in any big city to this day. Then there were the Berliners who did not so much rent a home as rent a pause in one, a bed for certain hours, a mattress still warm from the last body that had been lying on it. One person by day, another by night. That was real. In a city that large, housing pressure and poverty could strip life down to that level. Not a room of your own, not really, not even a bed, just your turn in it. It's a terrible way to live, not merely because it's uncomfortable, but because it continually takes out of life. You don't build anything there, you don't settle. You don't wake with any real sense that the room belongs to you or you belong to it. You arrive, you lie down, you go. And we've all had that experience in guest houses or hotels or Airbnbs. But that has the dignity of travel. This didn't. This was every day. The place itself made the point without explanation. The air was often stuffy, like it had been used too many times. The blankets had seen too much use. The room knew too many different sleepers. That was one kind of Berlin. A little above that, though often not by very much, came the furnished room. And this to me is possibly the archetypal way of living in Weimar Berlin. A furnished room sounds almost respectable, and that's part of its power. It gives the illusion of a settled life, even when settled life is precisely what's missing. A clerk may live in one, so might a typist or a widow trying to remain independent, a student in from the provinces, or a travelling salesman, or somebody's discreet mistress. All of these people might live in a furnished room. All of them fit naturally there. And furnished didn't really mean very much. It meant enough to stop the place looking bare. A bed, usually with an iron bedstead, a washstand, wardrobe, a table, a chair. Maybe a mirror if the landlady had standards. Perhaps there was a chest of drawers or a print on the wall, usually chosen more for decency than for artistic merit. If you were lucky, there was a stove. You could call the room private, but you'd have to say it with a bit of a straight face and a lack of conviction because really you could hear everything that went on around you. The walls were very thin. Often these were interiors that had been subdivided. One of the things I like about these interiors, from a historian's point of view, is that they tell two stories at once. The first is the one that the occupants want the world to see. I have a room, I have an address, I have my life under some form of control, I have respectability. And the second one is what the room itself gives away. This is temporary, this is watched, this is fragile. The landlady may hear the visitor on the stairs before you did. The walls carry your arguments, your business discussions, your lovemaking into the next room. The house rules might be strict in exactly the places where the house itself was least morally secure. No visitors after 10, no gentlemen callers, no cooking, no music, no pets, rent in advance. Everything about the system said that private life was permitted there, but under supervision, under certain constraints. And that feels to me very Weimar Berlin. The room offered dignity, but cautiously. It lets you hold on to form while reminding you that your footing is uncertain. It's a room built upon compromise, and compromise is one of the great conditions of the era. If you move out of the single room and into the smaller flats of the poorer districts, the atmosphere changes again. Loneliness gives way to pressure. Here, the issue is not that life is provisional. The issue is that there's too much life and not enough room for it. A family in a small apartment, and remember, families at this stage are much larger than they are now. They might have 5, 6, 8 children. They will all use the same small apartment for everything. The same room might be used for sleeping, eating, living, depending on the hour of day. Children shared beds. Often there might be 4 in a bed, top to tail. Boarders might be taken in when the maths didn't work. The kitchen wasn't just a kitchen, it was the center of a household existence because it's the warmest place to be. And because of that, that's where the youngest children would sleep. I always think you have to be careful here because there's a temptation to turn poor interiors into melodrama, and we do see this a lot in dramatizations of the period. What strikes me more reading and looking at the evidence is not the sordidness, not the grubbiness, but the effort. These homes were often worked hard by the women who tended them. The floors were scrubbed, linen was washed as often as possible, meals improvised, things mended rather than replaced. There was a huge amount of work went in to keeping these places clean and with dignity. The room may have been crowded. That doesn't mean that people had surrendered. Entirely on the contrary, the determination not to let life to collapse into filth became almost heroic. You can see this in the media of the time rather than modern media. If you look at something like the, in many ways, excellent Babylon Berlin adaptation, all the images of the lower class environments are all horribly grubby and dirty. Contrast that with the media of the day, something like the opening scenes of M, and you see women working industriously, scrubbing the floors, scrubbing the steps, doing the laundry. That is more accurate to the picture. Still, the pressure was there all the time. Too many bodies, too little privacy, too little quiet, too many things that had to be done in one small space. You can feel it in the architecture of Old Berlin. Blocks built around courtyards, the front house respectable enough from the street where the middle class or the working class foreman lived. Then the side wings, and then the cheapest at the back, the most crowded rear buildings. All those layers of life packed in behind a facade that lied on behalf of the city. A flat in one of those districts wasn't simply home, it was a negotiation with compression. And compression changes people. It changes the rhythm of family life. It changes shame. It changes sexuality. It changes quarrels, how a child grows up, what secrets are possible. In a sense, the room is not a passive container, it's actively molding the lives within it. Next come the respectable middle classes, and the feeling shifts again. Here, the room is still under pressure, but the pressure has a different character. It's no longer pure compression, it's form under strain. These are the apartments of clerks, teachers, civil servants, lower professionals, families with education and standards, and the memory of security. They might even be in the same building as the workers, just in the front house of the block. You walk into these rooms and you feel immediately that it's trying to say something. There's a proper table, there are framed pictures, there may be books. Very often, there is more furniture than our modern eye would consider necessary, because furniture in such homes did a social task. It announced continuity. It told visitors that the household still belonged to a world of self control and command. Possessions were rare and expensive, not cheap and easily ordered online from China. The amount you had spoke of your standing. To have more was to be more in many cases. And that's often has a slight sadness to it. The sideboard might remember prosperity better than the family did. The piano may have been bought during a different era. The curtains might be from a style that spoke back to a confidence that inflation and insecurity had already eroded away. One could see a room trying not to admit what history had done to the people living in it. And they had been unable to bear parting with those objects that were betraying their secrets of what they had lost. It makes middle class interiors in Weimar Berlin incredibly revealing. They're not simply respectable, they're defensive. They hold on against humiliation. They insist that standards remain, that manners remain, that order remains, and that while money may be tighter than it ever used to be, the servants might have gone, the repairs postponed, but the household is working harder than the room is revealing. Then there's the hotel. I think the residential hotel is one of the most underrated interiors in Weimar Berlin. Residential hotels are something that was once a staple in the world and has now mostly disappeared. It's not a hotel of the passing tourist, but a hotel is a semi-permanent home, a suite, a room, or even a floor which somebody lives in for months, perhaps years, without quite becoming domestic in the ordinary sense. That suited Berlin very well. It suited businessmen, actresses, widows with money, foreign visitors, women in delicate arrangements, men between households, or men avoiding having households. People who needed discretion, people who preferred service to homemaking, people who liked the freedom having a room professionally maintained and no one asking too many questions. A hotel room of that kind created a different sort of life. You were not exactly private because you're surrounded by staff and other guests, and yet you're insulated from the usual obligations of neighbourhood and household. You can eat downstairs, you can receive visitors, you can vanish for a day. You can be lonely in superior quality conditions. The room becomes a shell of freedom or the performance of freedom. A hotel can allow a person to live in a state of elegant suspension. The contrast with the furnished room could hardly be sharper. Both are temporary, both can hold loneliness, but one is a precarious foothold, the other is a privilege. If we move west into areas like Charlottenburg and Wilmersdorf, the rooms begin to breathe more easily. The city there starts to look more recognizably Weimar in a modern metropolitan sense. There are better apartment blocks, more light, cleaner entrances, more air in the layout, better bathrooms, better kitchens, in some cases, a telephone, a balcony, a sense that the apartment was designed not simply to shelter life, but to present it in a modern form. The difference isn't merely that these homes are nicer, it's that they feel more at ease with the age they're in. The older middle class apartment often carries a 19th century feel within it, even when the family inhabiting it is trying to remain current. The Western apartment feels more willing to admit that time has moved on. The furniture is less burdened by inheritance. There's less oak panelling here, more white walls. People here can afford to throw things away and buy new. The arrangement of rooms feels less ceremonial and more urban, more alert to convenience and style. It's not avant-garde in most cases. Don't confuse the idea that every decent Charlottenburg flat looks like an Art Deco gallery. It's not the case. Most people lived a lot more conservatively than that. But the atmosphere is still different. The home no longer has to defend status like the lower middle classes were doing. It's advertising modernity. It says we are part of the new Berlin. And then finally, there are the places like the Grunewald and the villa districts. And here you're not really dealing with bigger versions of the same thing as you have been as the apartments move out across Berlin. Here you're dealing with another relation to life altogether. A villa or house changes the meaning of space. A poor family in the centre uses one room for three purposes. Here, a wealthy family can allow rooms to specialise. A dining room is just for dining. A library isn't also a bedroom and a kitchen and three other things. A garden produces quiet by distance. Bedrooms don't have to contain a whole household. There are bathrooms here, expected, private, not shared by the whole community. There are probably servants to absorb the labour that elsewhere exhausts wives and daughters. And above all, there is quiet, silence. Silence not as a rare interval, but as an ordinary condition. And that's a power of a very deep kind. At the bottom of the city, people rent hours in a bed. In the Grunewald, they own quiet. And that difference reaches beyond mere comfort. It affects people's tempers, their privacy, their confidence, how they conduct their relationships, how they raise their children, how they keep their secrets and their privacy. A city can be shared geographically while being completely unequal acoustically. Some have no privacy at all. Others share only what they choose. So when we speak of Weimar Berlin, it's worth remembering how many cities are contained within that name. A man in a doorway or in a bed rented by a shift. A young woman in a furnished room hoping the landlady didn't notice her visitor, a family making a kitchen do the work of three rooms, the respectable apartment keeping up appearances with furniture bought before inflation, the widow in the hotel suite, the smart Western flat looking to the future, and the villa treating the whole urban storm as distant weather. That's not just a range of housing, that is a map of social existence. And once you see that, the city's history looks different, I think. Not less political, no less dramatic, but more intimate, more truthful, more human, and perhaps more useful to anyone trying to understand how people actually lived through the era. Public life matters. The politics matter. Of course they do. But a person's relation to the room they live in shapes them more intimately, more steadily than the headlines in the newspaper. A furnished room produces one kind of secrecy. A cramped flat produces one kind of strain. A bourgeois apartment under pressure produces a kind of pride. The hotel suite produces a kind of freedom, and the villa produces a kind of insulation. Rooms train people. People mold themselves to their environments. The rooms teach them what can be hidden, what can be endured, and how much dignity can survive within four walls. So, if you want to understand Weimar Berlin, don't begin with the familiar spectacles, the political machinations. Begin indoors with the iron bedstead, the washstand, the overfurnished parlour, the tiny kitchen, the room in the hotel where nobody asks questions, or the villa in the Grunewald. That's where Berlin really lived. And that's where much of the truth lies. Thanks very much. Subscribe for more.